The weight of a grief too vast to name settled upon the old church, its cold stone walls seeming to absorb the silent sorrow of the crowd. I sat in the front pew, a statue carved from loss, my spine rigid, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. The air was thick, heavy with the cloying, funereal scent of white lilies, a fragrance I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was the scent of the end of my world. That day we were burying Alexander, my son, my only child. The church was a sea of bowed heads and somber suits, a testament to the life he had lived. Friends, colleagues, relatives I hadn't seen in years, all had come to pay their respects. Their tears flowed freely, their hushed sobs a mournful chorus against the organ's low dirge. But my own eyes were dry. I had no tears left to shed, only a hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. I was his mother. The thought was a relentless drumbeat in my mind. I had to be the strong one, the pillar, even as the very foundations of my existence were crumbling into dust. Next to me, my daughter-in-law Martha was a storm of grief. Her sobs were ragged, desperate sounds that echoed through the cavernous space, a raw and public performance of a pain I felt too deeply to display. I did not judge her. How could I? She had lost her husband, the man who had been the center of her universe. But my gaze drifted to my granddaughter Chloe, a fragile silhouette between us. At 15 years old, she was a whisper of a girl, all sharp angles and quiet intensity. Her head was bowed, not in prayer, but over the cold blue light of her phone, her thumbs moving restlessly across the screen. She shed no tears. She spoke no words. She had retreated into a fortress of digital silence, a place where the cruel reality of this day could not touch her. A sharp, physical pain lanced through me. I yearned to pull her into my arms, to offer some comfort, but my throat was a knot of unspoken words. How could I comfort her when I couldn't even comprehend the sudden, brutal finality of Alexander's absence? After the service, a strange sense of dislocation washed over me. Alexander's in-laws, Arthur and Rivlin, took command of the gathering with an unnerving efficiency. They moved through the crowd like seasoned diplomats, dressed in impeccably tailored mourning clothes, their gestures precise, their smiles courteous but utterly devoid of warmth. Arthur, a man built of sharp lines and cold ambition, shook hands and murmured thanks, but his eyes were like chips of ice, reflecting nothing. Rivlin, his wife, glided beside him, a portrait of distant elegance, her condolences delivered with the polished chill of a practiced speech. Watching them, I felt like an outsider, a guest at my own son's funeral. He was my blood, my life's work, and yet in their perfectly orchestrated sorrow, I felt utterly erased. They were managing the end of his life as if it were a corporate merger, and I, his mother, was merely a minor shareholder. The feeling was a cold poison seeping into my veins, a sense of wrongness I couldn't yet articulate but felt with every fiber of my being. Several days later, just as a fragile numbness had begun to settle over me, the phone rang, shattering the quiet of my empty house. It was Mr. Ramirez, Alexander's lawyer. His voice on the other end was deep and serious, carrying an unspoken weight. "Mrs. Betty," he said, the formality a stark reminder of the new harsh reality, "I need you to come to my office. We have important matters to discuss regarding Alexander's estate." The drive downtown was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my heart a heavy leaden thing in my chest. His office was a suffocating space, filled with the scent of old leather, aging paper, and secrets. Mr. Ramirez, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with solemnity, did not waste time with pleasantries. He pushed a thick brown envelope across the polished expanse of his mahogany desk. "This is Alexander's last will and testament," he announced, his tone flat, as if he were reading a weather report. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, amidst a sheaf of cold, legal documents, was a single, old-fashioned metal key. It was heavy, its surface worn smooth by time and use, its edges dulled with age. As Mr. Ramirez began to read the will aloud, each word was a fresh wound. The legal jargon was a meaningless drone until a single phrase cut through the fog of my grief. Alexander was leaving me, his mother, the sole and complete ownership of a property known as Maple Creek Farm. The name struck me like a physical blow. Maple Creek. A name I had not heard in years, a name that belonged to a ghost from the past, A sudden, vivid memory flooded my mind, as sharp and clear as if it had happened yesterday. Alexander, a small boy of 10, his curly hair a wild halo around his face, his brown eyes wide with a terror that seemed too old for his young face. He was clutching my hand on a rainy afternoon, his small voice trembling. "Mom, I hate Maple Creek," he had whispered, his grip tightening. "Never go there, okay? Promise me." Only bad things happen there. I had dismissed it then as a childish fear, a nightmare he couldn't shake. But now, his plea echoed in the silent office, a chilling premonition. Why? The question screamed in my mind. Why would he leave me the one place on earth he had begged me to avoid? And an even more pressing question began to form. Why was Martha, his wife and the mother of his child, not here? Why was she not a part of this final, intimate act? My throat closed, and I looked at Mr. Ramirez, my eyes pleading for an explanation, for some piece of a puzzle that made no sense. He simply shook his head, his expression a mixture of professional duty and genuine pity. "I only know what is written in the will, Mrs. Betty," he said softly. "The rest, Alexander took with him." I left his office in a daze, the cold, heavy key clutched in my hand. It felt less like a key and more like a burden, a secret I was now tasked with unlocking. On the drive home, a flicker of movement in my rearview mirror caught my eye. A black SUV, sleek and anonymous, was behind me. I tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, my grief-addled mind playing tricks on me. But it stayed there, 2 car lengths behind, a silent, dark predator. It followed me from the downtown core, through the winding suburban streets, its presence a growing weight on my already frayed nerves. Only when I turned onto my own street did it finally peel away, disappearing as silently as it had appeared, leaving me with a profound and unshakable sense of being watched. That night, sleep was a distant country I could not reach. I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall the only sound. It was a merciless rhythm, each tick a reminder that time marched on, even though Alexander's time had stopped forever. I took the key from my purse, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of my palm. It was small, but it felt as if it held the weight of a universe I had never known. The memory of my 10-year-old son returned, his face a mask of fear. That look, which I had once dismissed, now seemed like a desperate warning, a message sent across time that I had failed to understand. The next morning, I awoke with a new, unshakable resolve. I had to know. I had to understand the secret of Maple Creek Farm. I dressed quietly, moving through my silent house like a ghost. I didn't call my sister Sarah. She had been my rock through these dark weeks, a constant source of comfort, but this was a journey I needed to take alone. I was afraid that if I spoke my intentions aloud, my courage would evaporate like morning mist. The drive took me far from the familiar cityscape, out onto winding country roads that seemed to lead to the edge of the world. The further I went, the colder the air became, the landscape more wild and untamed. The path to the farm was a narrow, gravel track, nearly swallowed by overgrown weeds that scraped and clawed at the sides of my car. Finally, through a thicket of ancient, gnarled trees, I saw it. A weathered wooden sign, the words Maple Creek Farm faded and peeling, barely legible. I stopped the car, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. The forbidden place. The iron gate was a formidable barrier, rusted and heavy, bound by a thick, ancient padlock. It looked as though it hadn't been opened in a generation. With a trembling hand, I retrieved the key. It slid into the lock with a surprising smoothness. I held my breath, turning it until a loud, dry click echoed in the morning stillness. I pushed. The gate swung inward with a prolonged, agonizing shriek of protesting metal, a sound like a soul in torment. A chill, entirely separate from the morning air, snaked its way down my spine. "Do it for Alexander," I whispered to myself, the words a fragile mantra against the rising tide of my fear. My feet felt like lead as I crossed the threshold, driving onto the property that was now mine. The dirt road unspooled before me, flanked not by the ruins I had expected, but by shockingly vibrant green pastures. In the distance, the clean lines of newly built wooden stables stood against the morning sky, the woods still light and unstained by weather. The strong, clear whinny of a horse carried on the breeze, a sound so full of life it seemed to awaken the very land around me. I could see figures moving in the distance, People working with a quiet purpose, their sleeves rolled up as they carried sacks of feed. This was not an abandoned place. It was not a place of bad things. It was alive, breathing, humming with a secret energy. The main house came into view at the end of the road, and my breath caught in my throat. It was an old farmhouse, yes, but it had been meticulously, lovingly maintained. The white paint on the clapboard siding was crisp and new, the windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the red shingled roof looked as though it had been replaced just last week. This was not the cursed place from Alexander's childhood nightmares. This was a dream, a sanctuary built with a quiet, devoted care. I parked the car and stepped out, my shoes sinking into the soft, dark earth. A wave of profound bewilderment washed over me. I had steeled myself for decay and darkness, but what stood before me was a testament to love and dedication. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the heavy oak door, my mind a whirlwind of questions. "What secrets were you keeping, my son?" I pushed the door open, not knowing what world I was about to step into. The air inside was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the chill I had felt at the gate. It smelled of lemon polish, fresh flowers, and old beloved books. The house was not just maintained, it was cherished. The walls were adorned with stunning, vibrant paintings of horses, each brushstroke so full of life and movement they seemed ready to leap from their frames. Intricately carved wooden sculptures of wildlife stood in the corners, each piece a testament to a patient and skilled hand. A rich red Persian rug, its colors deep and warm, stretched across the polished hardwood floor, soft and yielding under my feet. I walked through the rooms in a daze, feeling like an intruder in a home that felt both deeply personal and strangely, achingly familiar. I discovered a library, its shelves reaching to the high ceiling, packed with leather-bound classics and modern novels. Next to it, a small art studio, an easel holding an unfinished watercolor of the Maple Creek Valley, the colors still damp, as if the artist had just stepped away for a moment. I stood there, transfixed, tracing the incomplete lines with my eyes, a lump forming in my throat. It was as if Alexander had left it there just yesterday, intending to return. And then I saw it. In the center of the main living room, bathed in a pool of sunlight from a large bay window, was a magnificent, gleaming black baby grand piano. And resting on its polished lid was a single, silver picture frame. I drew closer, my heart seeming to stop in my chest. It was a photograph of Alexander and me, taken on a long-ago summer afternoon. He was a boy of 8, his smile a radiant, gap-toothed burst of pure joy as he hugged me, his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. The tears I had held back for so long finally came, hot and unstoppable, blurring the image of the happy boy I had lost. "Alexander," I whispered, my voice choked and broken. "What did you build here? Why did you hide it from me?" Every object in the house, every carefully chosen piece of furniture, every book on every shelf, seemed to have been placed not for a new owner, but for the eventual return of a loved one. I felt his presence everywhere, in the scent of the wood polish, in the quiet hum of the house, in the very light that filled the rooms. But the questions only multiplied, each one more painful than the last. Why the secrecy? Why the prohibition, only to leave it all to me in the end? Driven by a desperate need for answers, I continued my exploration. A long hallway stretched away from the living room, lined with several closed wooden doors. I tried the handle of the first one, but it was locked. I tried the next, and the next. All of them were sealed shut, offering no clue as to what lay behind them. "What secrets were you keeping locked away, Alexander?" I wanted to scream, to kick down the doors, to tear the house apart until it gave up its truths. But I just stood there, my hand resting on the cool, smooth wood, a profound sense of helplessness washing over me. I returned to the living room, my gaze falling upon a large oak table in the center of the room. On its surface, a sleek silver laptop sat closed. Next to it, in a small crystal vase, was a single perfect red rose, its petals still sparkling with droplets of morning dew. I froze. The rose was a message. It was a deliberate, calculated gesture. Someone knew I was coming. Someone was waiting for me. With a deep, shuddering breath, I reached out and opened the laptop. The screen flared to life instantly, no password required. A single video file was already open on the desktop. Its thumbnail, a still image of my son. My son. He looked thinner than I remembered. his handsome face gaunt, the skin stretched taut over his cheekbones, but his eyes were the same. Warm, intelligent, and filled with a love that I recognized as my own. He was in his small, cluttered home office, the one I knew so well, with its leaning towers of books and the crooked landscape painting on the wall. And then he spoke. Mom, his voice filled the silent room, calm and measured, yet every syllable was a dagger in my heart. If you are watching this, it means I'm no longer with you. The world tilted on its axis, the air rushed from my lungs, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to shatter the screen, to silence the voice of my dead son, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, as silent tears streamed down my face, tracing cold paths on my skin. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were in the room with me, looking right into my soul. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice laced with a profound sadness. "I never wanted you to go through this, but I didn't have a choice." He began to explain, his voice a low, steady monotone, heavy with a sorrow that transcended the digital screen. He spoke of the hereditary heart condition, the same cruel genetic lottery that had stolen his father from us when Alexander was just a boy. He described a consultation 3 years ago with Dr. Cardwell, an old family friend. He spoke of the doctor's grave face, the clinical, sterile words that had pronounced a death sentence. "He told me I had 2 to 5 years left," Alexander said, his voice steady but his hands trembled slightly as he held up a thick medical file. He flipped through the pages, a blur of lab results, electrocardiograms, and doctor's notes. I saw other specialists. I got second opinions, third opinions. They all said the same thing. He paused, taking a deep breath. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you or Martha. I didn't want my last years to be a death watch. I didn't want you to live in fear, counting the days. I wanted us to be normal, to be happy, for as long as we could. I buried my face in my hands, my body shaking with silent, racking sobs. My son. My brave, foolish, beautiful son. He had carried this immense burden alone, shielding me from a truth he thought I couldn't bear. Every happy memory from the past 3 years, every family dinner, every shared joke, every hug was now tainted, recast as a scene in a tragedy where only he knew the final act. He had been performing, playing the part of a healthy man, while death was a shadow growing within him, and I, his mother, had noticed nothing. A wave of failure so profound it threatened to drown me washed over me. What kind of mother am I? Suddenly, a loud creak from the hallway ripped through the stillness of the house. The pristine white curtain on the window billowed inward violently, as if pushed by an unseen hand. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the window, the cold afternoon air rushing in, chilling me to the bone. I slammed it shut, my hands trembling, and turned back to the laptop. But the screen had changed. The video of his confession was gone. In its place, another video was playing automatically. It was still Alexander, but his expression was different now. The warmth was gone, replaced by a strange, urgent gravity. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes wide, his voice a rushed, desperate whisper. "Mom," he said, and the word was a plea. "There's something else. Something worse than the disease. I think someone is trying to make sure I get to the end of that timeline. Sooner." The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. I stumbled backward, the legs of the chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, trickling down my temples. Poisoned. The word hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Who? Why? The beautiful, sunlit room suddenly felt menacing. The paintings on the wall, the piano, the perfect red rose, they all took on a sinister new meaning. I had an overwhelming urge to flee, to run from this house and its terrible secrets. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my legs refusing to obey. At that exact moment, a figure appeared in the open doorway. I spun around with a strangled cry, my heart seizing in my chest. It was Chloe. My granddaughter stood there, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes red-rimmed and wide with a mixture of fear and concern. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I followed you. I was worried. Why did you come here alone?" I slammed the laptop shut with a reflex I didn't know I possessed, as if I could physically hide the horrifying truth I had just learned. "Chloe, honey, "What are you doing here?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even, to mask the terror that was clawing at my throat. "You should be at home." She took a tentative step into the room, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I couldn't," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw you leave this morning. So early. You've been acting so strange since the funeral. I was scared for you." Her eyes, so much like her father's, scanned the room, widening in confusion. "What is this place, Grandma? Why did Dad leave it to you?" The questions hung in the air, questions I had no answers for. How could I tell this fragile girl that her own father suspected someone was trying to murder him? How could I explain that this beautiful farm was not a sanctuary but a secret, a place of danger that even I was only just beginning to comprehend? I closed the distance between us and pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling the trembling of her small body against mine. I just wanted to understand your father a little better, sweetheart," I murmured into her hair, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Everything's going to be fine." But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that nothing was fine, and it might never be fine again. I led her to a sofa and poured her a glass of water, my hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. She watched me, her young face a mask of questions I couldn't answer. I forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might shatter. My only instinct was to protect her, to shield her from the darkness that had just been revealed. But the truth was a living thing now, and I knew I couldn't keep it caged forever. Just as a fragile semblance of calm began to settle, the roar of powerful engines shattered the afternoon quiet. I rushed to the porch, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A convoy of cars was making its way up the long dirt road. 3 gleaming black Mercedes-Benz sedans, moving with an intimidating purpose. They pulled to a stop in front of the house, their tires kicking up a cloud of dust that seemed to momentarily obscure the Sunday. The door of the lead car opened, and Arthur stepped out. He was dressed in an expensive black suit that seemed more appropriate for a boardroom than a farm, his face a cold, unreadable mask. From the second car emerged Revlin, wrapped in a long gray cashmere coat, her sharp, predatory eyes scanning the property as if she were assessing its value. And beside her, a man I didn't recognize, with silvering hair and a thick leather briefcase tucked under his arm. His gaze was sharp and penetrating, the look of a man who dismantles lives for a living. I knew instantly he was a lawyer, and not the kind that helps people. "Mrs. Betty," Arthur's voice boomed across the porch, deep and flat, utterly devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a man issuing a verdict. "We need to have a word. This ranch does not belong to you." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stood frozen, my throat so tight I couldn't speak. "What?" I finally managed to stammer, my voice a weak, trembling thing. But I forced myself to stand taller, to meet his icy gaze. "It is written in my son's will. Alexander left Maple Creek to me. You have no right to be here." Revlin let out a small, condescending laugh, a sound like ice cracking. "A will is just a piece of paper, my dear," she said, her voice soft but laced with venom. "The law is a wonderfully flexible thing, if one has the resources to bend it." She took a step forward, the sharp click of her heels on the stone steps, a sound of aggression. From behind me, Chloe stepped forward, her young face pale but her eyes blazing with a sudden, fierce anger. "What are you talking about?" she cried, her voice shaking but clear. "This was my dad's place. He wanted Grandma to have it, not you." I quickly pulled her back, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. I didn't want her in the line of fire. But the pain and confusion in her eyes was a fresh wound in my own heart. The gray-haired lawyer stepped forward, placing his briefcase on a small wooden table on the porch. He opened it with a series of sharp clicks, retrieving a thick stack of documents. "Mrs. Betty," he said, his voice as monotonous and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "I am Mr. Vargas, legal counsel for the family. These documents are property contracts, investment agreements that predate your son's will. They prove conclusively that this farm was purchased through an investment fund to which my clients were the primary capital contributors for many years. Mr. Alexander's will, I'm afraid, is legally subordinate to these prior claims." I stared at the papers, at the dense blocks of text and official-looking stamps, but the words swam before my eyes. "You're lying," I said, my voice gaining a strength born of pure outrage. Alexander never mentioned any investment fund. He built this place himself. Mr. Vargas offered a thin, humorless smile. You may believe that, madam, but a judge will see it differently. We are prepared to initiate a lawsuit that will be long, arduous, and extraordinarily expensive. We are here today to offer you a more sensible path. Relinquish your claim. It is your best and only option. The blood rushed to my head, a hot, furious tide. Relinquish my claim? I nearly shouted. You think I will abandon what my son entrusted to me because you threaten me with lawyers and lies? You have no idea who I am. But even as I spoke the defiant words, a cold dread was seeping into my heart. They hadn't come to talk. They had come to annihilate. Arthur's lips curled into a cruel, knowing smirk. There are many things you don't know, Mrs. Betty, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble. Just remember this. Some things are best left undisturbed. He turned on his heel, his expensive leather shoes making sharp, final sounds on the stone. Rivlin and Mr. Vargas followed without a backward glance. The car doors slammed shut, a sound of chilling finality, and the convoy drove away, leaving a swirling cloud of dust in its wake. As the dust began to settle, my eyes caught a flicker of black at the end of the long driveway, near the main gate. It was the SUV, the same black SUV that had followed me from the lawyer's office. It was parked there, half hidden by the trees, a silent, patient sentinel. A tremor of pure fear ran through me. They hadn't just found me here. They had been watching me from the very beginning. From the moment I held that key in my hand, they had been waiting. Grandma, what do they want? Chloe's voice was small and panicked beside me. She tugged on my sleeve, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. I looked down at my granddaughter, at her innocent, terrified face, and my heart broke. How could I explain this? How could I tell her that her own maternal grandparents were vultures, circling to pick apart her father's legacy? I squeezed her hand, pulling her close. From now on, I whispered, my voice urgent, you don't leave my side for a single second. Promise me. She nodded, her eyes still full of a confusion that tore at me. I led her back into the quiet house, the house that was supposed to be a sanctuary but now felt like the center of a battlefield. On the table, the laptop screen was still dark, a silent keeper of my son's last, terrible secrets. Just as I was trying to process the brazenness of Arthur's threats, a deep, gentle voice called out from the direction of the stables, startling me. Mrs. Betty? I turned to see a man approaching. He was perhaps 60 years old, lean and weathered, with a kind, sad face shaded by the brim of a worn cowboy hat. His eyes, when they met mine, held a depth of sorrow and wisdom that I found instantly disarming. My name is Elias, he said, his voice slow and deliberate, as if he weighed each word carefully before speaking it. I'm the ranch administrator. Mr. Alexander hired me 3 years ago. My first instinct was suspicion. After the confrontation with Arthur and Rivlin, I felt I couldn't trust anyone. But Elias seemed to sense my apprehension. He offered a small, melancholic smile. The young master. He saved me, he said, his gaze drifting toward a painful memory. He gave me a second chance when no one else would. I owe him everything. You have nothing to fear from me, ma'am. There was a sincerity in his voice, a quiet, unshakable loyalty that I had not felt from anyone since Alexander's death. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. Thank you, Elias, I said, my voice still shaky. But Alexander, he never mentioned you. Elias nodded slowly, as if he had expected the question. He wanted to protect you, Mrs. Betty. He didn't want you to worry. He kept many things close to his chest. He paused, his kind eyes glancing at Chloe, then back to me. But now that you're here, I believe you have a right to know the truth. He led us toward the stables, the scent of hay and horses, a strangely comforting aroma in the midst of the turmoil. Inside, 6 magnificent horses stood in immaculate stalls, their coats gleaming with health. Each one, Elias explained, had a name that held a special meaning for Alexander. There was Sunlight and Moondancer and Stardust. And then there was Midnight, a powerful black stallion whose dark, intelligent eyes seemed to look right through you. Chloe was instantly captivated. She reached out a tentative hand, stroking the horse's velvety nose, a small, genuine smile lighting up her face for the first time in weeks. Grandma, she breathed, her voice filled with wonder. He's just like the horse Dad used to tell me stories about. I felt a fresh pang of loss, sharp and piercing. My son had built an entire world here, a secret life filled with beauty and passion, and he had never shared it with me. Did he? Did he come here often? I asked Elias, trying to keep my voice steady. Almost every month, ma'am, he replied, his hand resting on another horse's neck. He repaired this stable with his own 2 hands. He oversaw the construction of the new greenhouse himself. He didn't trust many people, only a chosen few. Elias stopped, his expression growing serious, his voice dropping lower. Mr. Alexander loved this place more than anything, but he also feared it. He once told me that Maple Creek was both his greatest dream and his darkest nightmare. Elias's words hung in the air, another piece of the puzzle I couldn't quite fit. The pride I felt for my son's secret accomplishment was now tinged with a growing dread. I was about to ask him more, but he leaned in closer, his gaze darting around cautiously as if to ensure we were alone. "You should know," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "that Mr. Alexander left more for you than just those videos on his computer." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my own voice trembling in response. Elias didn't answer directly. He simply gestured for us to follow him. He led us out of the stables, across a wide, grassy field, to a dilapidated old barn that stood at the far edge of the property. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in 50 years, its wooden planks rotting, its tin roof streaked with rust. From his pocket, Elias produced a single rusty iron key. He fitted into the barn's heavy, padlocked door and turned. The hinges screamed in protest as he heaved the door open. "Follow me," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "And be careful where you step." I held Chloe's hand tightly, my knuckles white, as we followed Elias into the dark, musty interior. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. With a grunt of effort, Elias pried up a section of the floorboards, revealing a dark, hidden opening and a steep set of wooden stairs leading down into the earth. I froze, a cold dread washing over me. "What is this place, Elias?" I whispered. My voice choked. Chloe pressed closer to me, her breathing shallow and quick. "Mr. Alexander called it his safe room," Elias said, clicking on an old, heavy-duty flashlight. Its weak yellow beam cut a narrow path through the oppressive darkness. "He left things for you down here, but I have to warn you, ma'am, what you're about to see. It changes everything." We descended the creaking stairs into the cold, damp dark. When we reached the bottom, Elias swept the flashlight beam across the space, and I gasped. This was no simple cellar. The walls were reinforced with thick, solid concrete, like a military bunker. They were covered with geological maps, detailed land surveys, and satellite photographs, all meticulously pinned in place. In the center of the room stood a long work table, cluttered with files, external hard drives, and an array of sophisticated computer equipment, the screens dark but ready. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had stumbled into a secret world, an underground command center that my son had built in secret. He called it his war room, Elias said, his voice a low rumble in the silence. He knew that his wife's family would make a move for this land one day. He spent the last 3 years of his life preparing for it. With trembling fingers, I reached for the nearest file on the table. Inside were pages and pages of land purchase agreements, geological survey reports from 3 different independent oil exploration companies, and complex financial projections. I flipped through them, my vision blurring as I read. The land of Maple Creek Farm, the land I had always thought was just simple pasture, was sitting on top of a massive, untapped oil reserve. Its value wasn't in the millions. It was in the billions. I looked up at Elias, a lump forming in my throat. He knew, I breathed. He knew about this all along. Elias nodded grimly. He didn't just know, ma'am. He fought to protect it. He refused every offer to sell, every pressure to develop it. He said Maple Creek was a legacy. For you and for Miss Chloe. My son. My brilliant, besieged son, silently fighting a war on multiple fronts, carrying a terminal diagnosis, and never breathing a word of it to me. The pride and the pain were a dizzying, unbearable combination. But as I opened the second folder, my world collapsed. Inside was a detailed laboratory analysis report. Attached to it were clear, close-up photographs of tiny, opaque white pills. I read the conclusion. the words highlighted in bold red letters, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The provided food sample tested positive for a high dosage of a non-prescribed cardiac stimulant, which in patients with a pre-existing heart condition can induce acute cardiac arrest and be fatal. The image of Martha flashed in my mind, so clear and vivid it was like a scene from a movie. Martha, the loving wife, in the kitchen, always smiling as she prepared Alexander's meals, meticulously arranging the food on his plate. The soups, the salads, the special dishes she made just for him. Every memory of her care and devotion was now twisted into something monstrous. I stumbled backward, clutching my chest, the room spinning around me. "No," I whispered, my voice broken. "It can't be. Not Martha. It can't be her." Elias's face was a mask of sorrow. Mr. Alexander didn't want to believe it either, he said softly, but he began to suspect. He started having everything she made for him tested. The results were always the same. I shook my head, tears of disbelief and horror streaming down my face. The woman my son loved, the mother of my granddaughter, had been systematically, patiently poisoning him. The evidence was right here, cold, clinical, and undeniable. I glanced at Chloe, who was standing in the corner, her gaze fixed on a map on the wall, her small body rigid. She was trying so hard to be brave, but I knew she was drowning in a confusion and fear that I had brought upon her. Elias moved to a small locked metal box on the table. He opened it and took out a single red USB flash drive. "Mr. Alexander left this too," he said, plugging it into one of the computer terminals. The screen flickered to life, displaying a folder filled with short video files, each one dated over the last few months of Alexander's life. I sank into a chair, my body trembling, as Elias clicked on the first video. Alexander appeared on the screen, his face pale and drawn in the dim light of the bunker. "Mom," his voice was weak, but his gaze was steady and fierce. "If you found this place, then my worst fears were true. Someone is poisoning me. I don't know if it's for the money or for something else, but you have to be careful. You can't trust anyone." The tears fell unchecked now. I wanted to reach through the screen, to hold him, to tell him he wasn't alone, but he was just an image, a ghost in the machine, a message from beyond the grave. "Why, Elias?" I sobbed, my voice a raw, ragged sound. "Why did he go through this all by himself?" Elias lowered his gaze, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "He told me you were the only thing he had left in this world that was pure. He couldn't bear the thought of dragging you into this darkness. He wanted to protect you from them." As he spoke, a red alert box suddenly flashed on the computer screen. "Warning, remote access to external drive detected." Elias's face went pale. He lunged forward, ripping the power cord from the wall. The screen went black. "They know," he whispered, his voice tight with panic. "They know we're in here." My blood ran cold. "Who is they?" I asked, but Elias was already shaking his head, his eyes wide with a fear that terrified me. He gestured urgently toward the stairs. I grabbed Chloe's hand, and we scrambled up into the fading light of the barn, the smell of damp earth and betrayal clinging to us. As we stepped outside, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant, fiery strokes of red and orange. But the beautiful sunset brought no warmth, only a sense of impending doom. Chloe clutched my arm, her voice a desperate, rushed whisper. "Grandma, what's happening? What did Dad mean? Who would hurt him?" Her eyes pleaded for an answer, an explanation that could make sense of the nightmare we had fallen into. I pulled her close, my own voice a hoarse whisper. "One day, I will tell you everything. But not now, my love. Not now." I knew, in that moment, that there was no turning back. Maple Creek was more than just land and oil. It was my son's final battleground. It was his legacy, paid for with his life, and I would not let them win. That night, my hands steady with a cold, hard resolve, I called Mr. Ramirez. "I have evidence," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Damning evidence. We're taking them to court. They will not steal my son's legacy." Mr. Ramirez arrived at the ranch the next morning, his usual solemn expression replaced by one of grim determination. He sat at the dining room table, the same table where I had found the laptop, and for hours he meticulously reviewed every document from the war room. He watched every second of Alexander's video diaries from the red USB drive, his jaw tightening with each revelation. He listened intently as Elias recounted his story, his testimony a quiet, powerful confirmation of everything we had found. When he was finished, he looked at me, his eyes dark with the gravity of our situation. "This is explosive, Mrs. Betty," he said, his voice low. "The lab reports, the videos, Elias's testimony, we have a powerful case. But I must warn you, these people, the family of your daughter-in-law, they are not ordinary opponents. They have immense wealth, political connections, and a legal team that specializes in making the truth disappear." I met his gaze without flinching. "I don't care how powerful they are," I replied, my voice a steel blade. "I want justice for my son." The day of the trial, I walked into the courthouse feeling as though I were walking into an arena. The cold marble floors and gray walls seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. Chloe held my hand, her small fingers trembling but her grip firm. Elias walked silently behind us, a steadfast, protective shadow. On the other side of the courtroom, the enemy was assembled. Martha sat between her parents, a pale, vacant expression on her face. Arthur looked directly at me, his eyes cold and sharp as shards of glass. Revlin offered a slight, condescending smile, her arrogance a palpable force in the room. And behind them stood their lawyer, a man named Lopez, a famously ruthless attorney who looked at me as if I were a particularly uninteresting insect he was about to crush. The trial began, and every moment was an exercise in torture. Mr. Ramirez was brilliant. He presented the evidence with methodical clarity, his voice ringing with conviction. He played Alexander's videos. He presented the lab reports. He called Elias to the stand, whose quiet, heartfelt testimony painted a vivid picture of Alexander's secret struggle. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope. I looked at the judge, praying he would see the truth shining through the web of lies. Then, Mr. Lopez stood up, and my hope died. With a chilling theatrical calm, he dismantled our case, piece by piece. "These videos," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand, "are emotionally compelling, but they are not verifiable fact. In this age of digital manipulation, they could be anything. They prove nothing." He turned his attention to the lab reports. "These documents show the presence of a substance. They do not, however, prove who administered it, or when, or how." To leap to the conclusion that my client, a loving, grieving widow, is responsible is a monstrous and unsubstantiated accusation. He spun lies with the skill of a master weaver, twisting Alexander's careful preparations into the paranoid delusions of a dying man. He painted Martha as a devoted wife, suffering under the strain of her husband's illness and increasingly erratic behavior. He even produced a surprise witness, a shifty-eyed businessman who claimed Alexander had entered into a land deal with him before inexplicably backing out. "He wasn't himself in those final months," the man said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. He seemed confused, paranoid. Lopez delivered the final, brutal blow. "Your Honor," he said, his voice resonating with false authority, "we are dealing with a will created under duress by a man whose judgment was clouded by a terminal illness. How can this court possibly trust the final wishes of a man who was, by all accounts, not in his right mind?" Chloe suddenly shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly on the floor. "That's a lie," she cried, her voice trembling with rage. "My dad knew exactly what he was doing." The judge raised a hand, his face a stern mask. "Young lady, you are a minor and not a witness in this proceeding. Sit down." Chloe looked at me, her face crumpling, tears of frustration and helplessness streaming down her cheeks. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tight, my own heart shattering into a million pieces. The hearing ended with a provisional ruling. The judge, citing the complexity of the pre-existing financial agreements presented by Mr. Vargas, declared that until the definitive trial, the administration of Maple Creek Farm would be temporarily granted to Martha. The ground gave way beneath me. I had shown them the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth, and it wasn't enough. As we left the courtroom, a strange, terrible silence fell over me, so profound it was frightening. The judge's words echoed in my head, a relentless, torturous loop. "The temporary administration of Maple Creek remains in Martha's hands." I had failed him. I had failed my son a second time. In the grand, echoing hallway, Arthur and Revlin approached, their triumphant smiles not even thinly veiled. Arthur leaned in close, his voice a cold, sharp whisper in my ear. "You see, Betty? We told you. You can't win against us." I stared into his cold, dead eyes, a scream of pure rage trapped in my throat. Revlin glided forward, her silk dress rustling like a snake's scales. "You should have taken our offer," she purred, her voice a poisonous honey. "It's best you learn to stay away from things that don't concern you." Martha walked past me without a single glance, her face a blank, emotionless mask. The daughter-in-law I had once loved as my own was now a stranger, a ghost. But the deepest cut was yet to come. Chloe pulled away from me, her small face streaked with tears and contorted with a pain I couldn't bear to see. She ran toward her mother. "Mom," she cried, her voice breaking. "How could you? How could you let them say those things about Dad?" Martha stopped and looked down at her daughter, her expression unreadable. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, a crack in the facade, but then it was gone. She turned away without a word, following her parents down the long hall. I stood frozen, helpless, as I watched my granddaughter chase after a mother I no longer recognized, each of her small running steps plunging me deeper into an abyss of despair. Elias appeared at my side, his hand a gentle, steadying presence on my arm. "Don't you break now, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, firm rumble. Mr. Alexander was always 10 steps ahead. "This isn't over." His words were meant to be a comfort, but I could find no hope left within me. I allowed him to guide me through the swarm of reporters that had gathered, their cameras flashing like lightning, their shouted questions a meaningless cacophony. I stepped out of the courthouse and into a sudden torrential downpour. The cold rain soaked me instantly, chilling me to the bone, but I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. I had not only lost to them, I had lost a part of myself. That night, I couldn't bear the thought of returning to my own house, a place so filled with memories of Alexander's laughter. I went back to Maple Creek, to the house he had built. It felt less like a home now, and more like a mausoleum for my shattered hopes. I sat in the dark of his library, the books he had loved standing as silent witnesses to my despair. I ran my fingers over the spine of a leather-bound volume, and a single hot tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust on the cover. "I'm so sorry, Alexander," I whispered to the shadows. I tried, but I wasn't strong enough. The image of Chloe running after Martha, of Arthur's smug smile, of my own failure, played over and over in my mind, a relentless, waking nightmare. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, long after the storm outside had passed, my sister Sarah arrived. She stood on the porch, her face a perfect mask of sisterly concern. "Betty, I came as soon as I heard," she said, her voice filled with a convincing indignation as she wrapped me in a hug. "I can't believe the court sided with those monsters. But don't you worry. I'm here for you. We'll fight this together." For a moment, I allowed myself to lean into her embrace, to feel a flicker of comfort. Sarah, my only sister, the one who had stood by me after my husband died. She was my last anchor in this storm. I led her inside and told her everything about the trial, about the lies and the dismissed evidence, but I held back the deepest secrets. I didn't tell her about the war room or the toxicology report. Not because I didn't trust her, but because the knowledge felt dangerous, a poison I didn't want to spread. "I'm not giving up, Sarah," I said, my voice flat and tired. "Alexander deserves justice." She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with empathy. "I know. And you are the strongest woman I know. Alexander would be so proud. I'll help you in any way I can." Her words were a balm, a soothing lie that I desperately wanted to believe. But later that day, everything changed. I had left the living room to make a phone call to Mr. Ramirez to discuss our next steps. As I walked back down the hall, I glanced in and saw Sarah sitting on the sofa, her head bent over her phone, her thumbs moving quickly. Just as she looked up and saw me, hastily hiding the screen, my eyes caught a fragment of the message she was typing. The words burned themselves into my brain. "She still suspects nothing. Awaiting further instructions." My blood ran cold. The world tilted, the floor seeming to drop away from under my feet. Sarah. My sister. My confidant. Awaiting instructions? From whom? The answer was as obvious as it was sickening. I retreated silently, my heart a block of ice in my chest, I pretended I had seen nothing, but every kind word she spoke, every comforting touch, was now an act of grotesque betrayal. The memories flooded back, the seemingly innocent questions she had asked over the weeks about the will, about the farm, about my conversations with the lawyer. They were not questions of concern, they were intelligence gathering. That afternoon, Elias found me by the stables, his face grim. "Mrs. Betty," he said in a low voice. "Someone remotely accessed the security system last night. They wiped the camera footage from the day we went into the barn. Someone knows what we found, and they're watching us from the inside." I looked at him, the horrible truth solidifying in my mind. "It's my sister," I said, the words tasting like poison. Elias's sad, wise eyes told me he was not surprised. That evening I laid a trap. Over a quiet dinner, I let my voice take on a hopeful, almost excited tone. "Sarah, you won't believe it," I said, watching her carefully. "I found something today, tucked away in one of Alexander's old books in the library. A personal notebook. It's filled with details, names, dates. I think it's the proof we need. I think it could blow this whole case wide open." I saw it then, a flicker in her eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of her smile before she composed her features back into a mask of delight. "Betty, that's wonderful news," she exclaimed. "You must keep it somewhere safe." Later that night, I made a show of leaving the house to take a walk. But instead of walking down the driveway, I circled back, hiding in the deep shadows of the garden, my eyes fixed on the lighted living room window. And there she was. Sarah, pacing back and forth, whispering urgently into her phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her furtive glances and rushed, hushed tones told me everything. My own sister was a spy for the enemy, a viper I had welcomed into my home. The pain of this betrayal was sharper, deeper than any other. I had lost my son. I had lost my trust in his wife. And now, I had lost the last piece of my family. I was truly, completely alone. The 2 weeks leading up to the final, definitive trial were an endless, waking nightmare. Every day was a struggle to maintain a facade of normalcy for Chloe's sake, while secretly working with Mr. Ramirez to build a defense against an enemy who seemed to know our every move. But I clung to a sliver of hope. The notebook I had found was, of course, a decoy, but the real evidence, the USB drive and the original lab reports, were safely locked away. Then, the day before the trial, the final blow came. The city's largest newspaper ran a front-page story with a sensational headline, "Grieving Mother in Inheritance Fraud Scandal." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, filled with anonymous sources and twisted half-truths, painting me as a greedy, manipulative woman attempting to use a forged will to steal a family fortune. They had taken my most valuable evidence, Alexander's video diaries, and distorted them, presenting them as proof of his mental instability, not his victimization. I knew, with a sickening certainty, who had leaked the story. When I walked into the courtroom for the final battle, I saw Sarah sitting not with me, but on the other side of the aisle, right next to Martha and her parents. She gave me a single, cold, defiant look, the loving sister I knew replaced by a hard-eyed stranger. The trial was a farce, a perfectly rehearsed piece of theater. Mr. Ramirez fought valiantly, but every piece of our evidence was dismissed, every argument refuted by Lopez's slick, condescending logic. When the judge's gavel finally fell, declaring the will invalid and granting full ownership of Maple Creek Farm to Martha and her family, a wave of applause erupted from their side of the room. I stood motionless, the world dissolving into a blur of sound and light. Chloe collapsed against me, her body racked with sobs. "No," she cried, her voice muffled against my chest. "Daddy wanted you to have it, Grandma. He did." I hugged her tightly, my own grief, a silent, crushing weight. I couldn't let her see me break. Not now. We left the courthouse defeated, my son's legacy stolen, his name slandered, his murderers triumphant. That night, back at the dark, silent house at Maple Creek, I finally allowed the despair to wash over me. I had lost everything. I sat alone in the library, the darkness, a comforting blanket for my pain. Alexander was gone. His legacy was in the hands of his enemies. My sister had betrayed me. My granddaughter's heart was broken. I had failed. Suddenly, a vibration on the table beside me. My phone. The screen lit up the darkness. A message from an unknown number. My hand trembled as I picked it up. There were only 5 words on the screen, 5 words that made my heart stop, 5 words that changed everything. Mom, I am still alive. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. I stared into the darkness, my mind reeling, my heart pounding a frantic, impossible rhythm against my ribs. Was it possible? Could it be a cruel, twisted joke? Or was it a spark of hope, a light in the crushing darkness? If Alexander was alive, where had he been? And what terrible truth was still waiting to be revealed? The story you have just heard is based on real events, with names and locations altered to protect the identities of those involved. It is shared not for judgment, but in the hope that it will make you pause and reflect. How many battles are fought in silence, behind the closed doors of a family home? I ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have chosen silence to keep a fragile peace, or would you have risked everything to fight for the truth? Your thoughts are important, because every shared story can become a light for someone else walking in the dark. May you always find the courage to face your own battles, and may that courage lead you to brighter days. On your screen now, you will find 2 more stories from our channel. I am certain they will move you. Thank you for staying with me on this journey.